Welcome back to Just Vetting, where we go beyond the transaction to explore what it really takes to build, grow, and lead a successful veterinary business and career. Today's guest is one of the most recognized and respected voices in veterinary orthopedics and surgical education. Dr. David Dycus is an internationally recognized orthopedic surgeon, educator, speaker, author, and consultant who has delivered more than 200 continuing education lectures worldwide and led more than 150 hands-on surgical laboratories. He's authored numerous research articles and textbooks, chapters, co-edited various periodicals, and was recognized by DVM 360 as one of the 10 veterinarians to watch. In 2023, he received the DVM 360 Veterinary Hero Award in surgery. Beyond surgery, Dr. Dycus is deeply involved in shaping the future of veterinary education and leadership through organizations including the American College of Veterinary Surgeons, AO North America, AVORE, and VIN. He's also the founder of Fusion Veterinary Orthopedics, a practice built around the philosophy of where expertise meets empathy. Dr. Dycus, welcome to Just Vetting.
Thanks so much for having me. This is great. It's fun to chat with you.
You know, just by learning just about all the things that you touch, we can talk probably for most of the day today. You've led such an extraordinary life up until this point, and you're such a young guy. I really wanted to start off, what your passion and what initially drew you towards orthopedic surgery, because I know that's very passionate to you. How did you end up in a career in orthopedic surgery?
Yeah, it's a little interesting because I was not one of these that knew I wanted to be a veterinarian from a young age. I actually didn't decide to go to veterinary school until college. I grew up all my life playing sports. I had numerous injuries, was in and out, seeing physicians and physical therapists. I went to college to play baseball. I was majoring in biology, and in about my second year in school, my dad said, well, what are you going to do with a biology degree? There's not a lot that you can just graduate without going to some sort of graduate school or professional school. And I said, I don't know. I had just planned to play baseball. Hadn't really thought that far. So I go to practice, and this is about the time some of my friends are starting to study for the MCAT and taking up all of their weekends and time. And I thought, I don't know that I want to do that. And one of my friends said, well, what about veterinary medicine? And I said, that's interesting. So I went to my major professor. I said, I think I want to go to vet school. But I need to kind of figure out what this profession's about. So he hooked me up with a job in college at a veterinary hospital. And I got there. I loved it. They were doing surgery. I fell in love with surgery. Applied to veterinary school, got to veterinary school. I had no idea you could specialize. Probably first week of veterinary school, I found out you could specialize. So I went to my anatomy professor and I said, how do I become a surgeon? I want to be a surgeon. And he said, well, let's get through the first month of veterinary school first, and then we'll kind of pave that pathway for you. And so I was very grateful to my mentors in veterinary school that kind of led the way for me to become a surgeon. And then the orthopedic side of things always came from, I like tinkering, I like fixing. I also like instant gratification, where I can say, take something that's broken or something that is limping and fix that, and see that fix rather quickly. And my mentors were also heavily orthopedically oriented. And the way training goes in veterinary school, when you specialize during your residency, all surgeons are trained as general surgeons. So we learn soft tissue orthopedic and neurosurgery. So my first job out of residency was doing general surgery. And I took a job with another surgeon. He liked soft tissue. I liked ortho. So I said, well, I'll kick you all my soft tissue cases. He kicked me all of his ortho cases. And then a position opened up in Maryland at an orthopedic and sports medicine only practice. It was actually probably the first subspecialty of a specialty out there. So I convinced my wife and daughter we needed to move to Maryland so I could take this job. And we got there, and I loved the job. I was there for 6 years. I like to tell people that because I have such a niche in orthopedics, I got really smart in the area of orthopedics, but once we get outside of there, I get pretty dumb pretty quick. But having that niche allowed me to start lecturing and teaching, and I discovered that I really liked teaching. I liked taking these concepts that are challenging and breaking them into simpler components. So I really love teaching interns and residents, and I really love lecturing to general veterinarians. I love teaching labs to not only general veterinarians but also surgeons as well. And I never planned to have that morph into, being able to lecture all over the world and do these things. If somebody had asked me in veterinary school, would you be traveling and teaching and publishing? I would have been like, absolutely not. But it's just sort of evolved over time. And I think we all have problems saying no.
Right.
So I had a lot of problems saying no for about a decade. So I found myself committed to a lot of things. So, and here I am.
Yeah. I remember you and I bumped into each other a couple of years ago. I think it was in North Carolina at a conference, and you were either heading or you just came back from Dubai, right? I think where you've been a couple times, right? You've been there.
Yeah.
Right? And I did a double take. I'm like, wait a minute, what'd you say? And you told me, and I had no idea. I didn't know that existed, and I just didn't know that. That was, it was pretty amazing. And then you also told me, I remember that same conversation. You're talking about lecturing and training all over the world. But then you're telling me that, you have clients that travel. We'll get into that a little more. And you have clients that travel, from, other states to come see you, specifically to come see you, which, again, was a little surprising when I first heard about it. But then, the more I look back on it, it's not. Because the relationship, even what I think a lot of us have with our own veterinarians, right? Their own, let alone a specialist where you want to get that, you're willing and you want that extra level of care for your pet. I found that really interesting.
Yeah, we attract clients because I'm located just outside of Washington, D.C., and so we get clients all up and down the eastern seaboard. I've had clients coming from the Midwest and the southeast part of the United States. And I really think it's twofold. One is because I'm so harnessed in on one aspect of veterinary medicine, so I can dig really deep into the details. And as a surgeon, I love doing surgery, but a lot of cases I see are also these non-operative kind of soft tissue injuries, which we sort of take it a step further to say what specific soft tissue and address that to resolve the issue. But I also think it's our approach to our clients. So as you mentioned earlier, when we started Fusion Veterinary Orthopedics, I wanted it to be where we were able to bring in the expertise of orthopedics, but also not have the client feel like they're rushed and pushed through a process, but to take a step back, explain and listen and really make sure the clients know what's going on and why we're taking certain approaches. And so, compared to other practices, our consult times are probably a little longer than most. We're not trying to get in as many cases in a day as we can. What we want to try to do is get in the quality over the quantity. And I think a lot of people like that approach. They want to make sure they're heard. They want to make sure that their questions are being addressed. They want to make sure that they understand what's going on with their pet. And they want to know that when they leave here and they call with a question or email, that somebody's going to get back to them really quickly and address their concerns.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that. I wanted to touch on, where expertise meets empathy. I hear from a lot of my clients, you're obviously, you're trained clinically, but not operationally or financially. How did you prepare, yourself for building and growing a practice? And one of the, I guess one of the main things you're talking about is client communication, and I hear that from a lot of successful practice owners like yourself, where it's not really taught to you, obviously in veterinary school, and but obviously it's a critical component of in dealing with your clients, especially somebody like you who are coming to you for such a specialized service. You need to be able to explain that to your clients and be comfortable doing it and spend the time to do it. How did you embrace that?
Yeah, we are definitely not taught the business side. At least I wasn't in veterinary school. I never planned to own a business. When I was at the first practice, the orthopedic only practice, I planned to stay there forever. But like most with corporations, it was sold, and my experience with that particular corporation wasn't great, and so an opportunity came for me to partner into a veterinary hospital, and I had no idea what I was doing. I was upfront about that, but I knew over the years of how I wanted to approach clients. But I also realized we're a disposable income profession, and when it gets to the specialty level, clients are usually spending a lot of money, and most of the time insurance isn't just paying for it. So we really have to create a client experience. And I look to the hospitality industry, and essentially the goal is to knock the socks off of them. And I'm very particular about how I want things done. So long story short, the partnership I had didn't work out. And so at that point, I had about 4 years of the hard learning of what to do and what not to do. So when I started my own practice, I had a pretty good idea of how I wanted things to go. And then I looked again to very successful businesses outside of veterinary medicine, the Chick-fil-A's, Starbucks. And every time you go to any of those locations, every person, it's very consistent. The product is very consistent. And so we developed SOPs for really every avenue of things, from how do you answer the phone. When a client comes in the door, I want them addressed by name. So that means our CSRs need to be intuitive enough to look at the schedule to see who's coming in at that time when they walk in the door with that type of dog. We go as far as to say, well, help yourself to a cup of coffee over at the coffee bar, rather us saying, would you like us to go get you a cup of coffee and bring it to them? So we do everything we can to create a client experience, because number one, it's stressful if their pet is injured. And number two, things are expensive. And so we want them to feel that they're getting that value out of it. So I think the small things really, really help. And that's probably one of the I would say, if somebody asked me to describe, the pros and cons of myself in a job interview, I'd say maybe my micromanaging and attention to the very small details of every aspect might be a con. But I think from an overall business standpoint, it collectively has made us quite successful in a short period of time, by sticking with the principles I set to begin with. And even as we've gotten busy, not faltering from those.
Right. I guess, on that point, what do you think, or what are you seeing, in this period of time, is the hardest part of scaling a specialty practice while maintaining the culture and consistency? I think it seems it's probably pretty easy to skip over a lot of those processes and procedures that you're talking about, which are important to you, because it's time and money to others. So I guess while you find it's important to you, it may not be important to others, because then it prohibit your ability to scale.
Um, that's a great question. I think number one on the biggest thing is the people you hire, and they have to be on board with your vision. So we were very selective of the individuals that we hired. Our turnover rate is very, very low because I wanted to hire people that understood what we were trying to do, that wanted to come to work and have a good time, and try to create a culture where people are happy, because we spend most of the day of most of every week at work with these people. And so on the scalability side of things, we've not been open quite 2 years yet. And now I'm starting to look at, do I take on additional space next door to expand, or do I consider opening a second location? And I have to then look and say, am I happy with where we're at now versus do I want to continue to grow? But I also have to be very mindful every time I ask myself that we need to make sure we stay with the vision that I originally created. And so I've kind of put my foot down and said, I have no desire to scale to this, massive, facility with many surgeons or multi-specialty. I want to keep it a small location with 1 to 2 surgeons, where we're focusing on that client interaction. And what I've always discovered is if you practice great medicine and you're loyal to your clients, and for lack of better words, we sometimes have to bend over backwards for them a little bit, because they're paying us. I found that if you do that, the money will follow. You'll be successful without having to push to try to get as many cases in the door as you can. But then also making sure we don't burn the staff out. So I also wanted to hire probably more people than would be recommended by a lot of business professionals, because I don't want people stressed out all day when they're here. I would rather people be more laid back, and sometimes see people, not sitting around a lot, but our team, we may have somebody kind of relaxing for a minute, but what that translates to is, they get up on their own and they're cleaning, or they're helping out, or they're lending a hand, because not everybody's so stressed, because they're so overworked and burnt out. And so, on that side of things, my approach is maybe a little bit different than what some of the the business gurus would say you should do in terms of your staffing ratios.
Yeah, I was going to, being in such a high pressure surgical environment, I was going to ask you, how do you prevent burnout? Obviously you've answered that. And it's just a different approach that you've taken, and it works for you and your staff.
Yeah, I mean, if somebody were to break down our KPIs, they're going to look at our salary component and be like, your percentage is a little high, but at the end, it all normalizes out, because some of our other things are maybe a little lower than other practices. Yeah. And the nice thing about being an independently privately owned hospital, and I don't have investors, is that I don't have kind of hanging over me a certain profit, revenue percentage or profit margin that I have to hit to pay others. I just need the hospital to be successful for us to pay our bills. And so what that translates to is then I'm also able to price ourselves a little bit less than our competitors. So that also helps clients, because, everything is very expensive these days.
You're not kidding. I don't know. I was looking at something this morning, and I couldn't believe. Oh, I went to go get gas this morning to fill up my tank, and he goes, "You want a receipt?" And I said, "I do and I don't." Because I didn't want to look back. When I looked at it, I go, it's expensive these days. Everything is. I think I know the answer to this question, but I was just curious. One thing that stands out, if you go on your website and you look at all your, those client testimonials, which I love, and they're also, most of them are talking about the communication again, the empathy and feeling heard, all things that you touched on. I guess was that culture intentional from the beginning? I know you're on 2 years, but you were involved in a practice. Did you see something at the other practice that if I'm going to open up my own practice, this is one I want. This is how I want to build it, or did that just kind of evolve over a pretty quick period of time?
No, that was from day one. One of our primary focuses was to go after that aspect of communication. And really, I learned that because I was in practices that were multi-specialty, that were ortho only, that grew quite large, that were taken over by corporations. And what I watched was the communication and information kind of go downhill. And then you could see the frustration from clients. If they, wanted to schedule an appointment, it was sort of like, here, you have to fill out this online intake, and then somebody will get in touch with you. And so it just kind of fell to a black hole. And then they would call, and nobody was really helping them out. And so we have a policy that if a client reaches out to us, even if we can't address it right then, they're going to be updated every 24 hours via phone. Let them know where we're at in the process, or what we're waiting on, or what the issue may be. And that's because the same thing on my end. Like if I have an issue, and the human medical world is horrible about communication. If you go to have something done, you never hear from anyone.
Can't get a hold of anybody. I know it's rare. It's actually it's the rare. It's the small practice. That actually, when you do, you're surprised, and it shouldn't be that way.
Right. And so that I was like, you know what? I don't want it to be like that. I want it to be if I was going to the doctor, how do I want to be treated? And I said, there's no reason we can't treat our clients this way. They are usually at home sitting on pins and needles waiting 100%. On information. And I get it that we're busy and it sucks, but I'm here late. I probably work more than I should, but I make sure everything gets done. I'm a huge proponent of work-life balance. Right. Don't get me wrong, but I also, from a business ownership standpoint, know that, there's a responsibility that I took on, and that grind comes along with it. And, I think it's all about time management. I'm able to get my staff out of here on, relatively appropriate times. Right. And, I'm usually home at decent times. So I'm not, spending all my waking hours working on the business, even though I've got 50,000 other things going on that take up my evenings and weekends.
I didn't know that. Let me ask you just one last question on the culture aspect of it. If you walked into someone's practice tomorrow and they had a broken culture, what are the first two things or that come to your mind that you'd suggest that you would address in that practice?
Yeah, I think we have to look at how overworked people are. These aspects of let's fit in as many appointments in a 15 to a 20-minute day and let's staff as little as possible. I would say that's not going to work. I said, I would say let's extend the appointment times, let's hire more people, and also leverage on your team. Doctors need to do doctor things, your technicians need to do technician things, and your assistants need to do assistant things. And doctors don't need to get bogged down into the weeds of doing blood, drawing blood and putting in catheters. That's somebody else's job. And the other thing, and when we bring people in to interview them, one of the things that they always leave when we get feedback at the end of their working interview is like, wow, your team, everybody seems so happy and they're picking at each other and they're joking around and people are helping each other out. And so I would kind of look at what does it seem like, just observing the team, like how are people functioning? Are people getting along, or is everybody so overworked that everybody's angry with each other? And then let's say, well, let's maybe not worry so much about the quantity and let's go back to the quality, and then the money's going to follow.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes sense, and you don't want to organize chaos, and it's just going to create stress. Again, I think it comes down to two-part communication, which is two parts: internally with your team, and then communication, obviously with the clients. As someone who's trained, surgeons and lectured surgeons all over the world, I guess what separates, going back to what you do, and what you've really drilled down, I guess, great surgeons from average surgeons?
Oh, well, I'm a little old school. And so I think it comes down to respecting the sanctity of surgery. Again, old school, I was taught like when you're in scrubs, you tuck your scrub shirt in. When you go into the OR, that's a place where you're focused, and it's lots of trying to strive for perfection. I've been at this for over a decade, and I still evaluate every radiograph critically to figure out what could I have done better. Even though the dog or the cat may do great, I'm going to look and say, well, what could I have done better to constantly improve?
Mm-hmm.
And so I try to achieve the highest level every time, and I don't want to get complacent. And I think, if you get into private practice and you get complacent, you can quickly become an average surgeon, and technology and everything's going to pass you by. So you have to constantly stay up on it, which then means, you still have to read in the literature. You still have to talk with colleagues. You still have to go out and continue evolving and learning.
There's let me ask you something. Going back to what you said at the outset, I'm not surprised. So you were focused on baseball, right? What position did you play in baseball?
So first base. I'm left-handed. I was a little limited.
Your first base? Those first base guys are supposed to be tall, aren't they? Supposed to be tall. You're a little short for first base.
I was the exception.
You were the exception, right?
Yeah, I was a short first baseman, but then I was too slow to be a good outfielder. Yep. But I could hit really well, and that's what sort of drove my career.
And I bring that up. Listen, I was never at that level, a collegiate level, but obviously playing sports as a kid, and then through high school and baseball. I love playing baseball. The camaraderie you had with your teammates, and especially in that dugout. You guys, you could be having fun, screwing around, enjoying each other. But you get up to bat, or when you grab your mitt and you go out to the field, it's like you turn something else on. And there's a picture I saw of you on your website where, in the operating room, it's just like there's you're looking somewhere, and it's almost like, okay, now you could be in the practice and you're joking with the staff, but as soon as you walked in those doors, it was like that same look when you grabbed your mitt and you went out to the field. So and you hear that a lot about, especially athletes at the collegiate level, and how you're successfully able to transfer that skill set, and it is a skill set, into a professional career, which you've done very well.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very accurate statement. Because when we're in the OR, we're doing what we need to do, and then we joke around outside. And my team will tell you, because everybody has their position, and they know, we cross the boundaries into the OR. It's a little bit of a different environment than when we're out in the treatment area, joking around.
You play music in the OR?
I do. And I'm a big fan of like classic rock and some 90s grunge. But I'm the oldest, and all my employees are younger, and they don't care for that so much. So we get lots of kind of new hits, which a little I let them kind of pick, unless it's a serious surgery or something's not going right. They kind of know that something's not going right if I change the music to something that I would rather hear than them. Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah, I have a stepbrother who's almost, he's just about retired now. He is a vascular surgeon, and when I was a young kid, talking with him on the human side, he's a vascular surgeon, and he's a big James Taylor fan, and I can't think of this other guy from the 70s, Jackson Brown, those guys. And I was so years ago when he told me that, he goes, Pete, when I'm in that OR, I got I'm listening to my music. He's tuned in, and he's a big jokester too, very similar to what you're talking about. Obviously around the practice, but as soon as you walk in that OR, it's a different person who goes in there. What are younger veterinarians, in your mind, underestimating about the level of discipline and repetition required to become, exceptional surgically? I think for you, just hearing, I don't know if I'm wrong, again, knowing enough about being an athlete, fielding those ground balls and up at the plate, and you were a good hitter, that just didn't come because, obviously you were skilled, but you put, I'm sure it's a lot of hours, swinging that bat and, eye-hand coordination. So I guess what are the younger veterinarians missing?
It's the work
Yeah.
ethic in the discipline. It's the hours spent. On the surgery side, during training, it was the hours spent with cadaver work. It was the hours spent reading, and this wasn't during the day. During the day you had clinical work, but in the evenings you had to learn. And so I think that there's you can go to work and enjoy your job and be good at your job, and then go home and enjoy your life and be good at that. But I think you're going to be good, but you're not going to be great. If you want to be great, there's a little bit more to it. Nobody's naturally
Right.
great, and therefore you have to work to become great. And repetition and training and discipline and work ethic, whether it's sports, whether it's getting in shape, whether it's your job, you're going to get better at, but you have to be willing to put forth that effort. And that's just the way life
Yeah.
is.
In someone who, and I know you have young kids too. My kids are a little older than yours, and it's the one thing I think as parents, if I guess not concerning, but you want to constantly keep talking with them, and hopefully, our work ethic, they see it, and see going to work and enjoying what you're doing, and hopefully that rubs off on them. You and I were talking before we hopped on here about uh, different podcasts and seeing different athletes. And I was telling you about Caitlin Clark, and it reminded me also too of the Michael Jackson Jordan biography, The Last Dance. You know, those two were at the top of their career, their profession, and it's not by chance. You listen to them talk, and it's hours and hours in the gym or being there, 5 hours at a time. That none of us see. You just assume they're that good. Yeah, there's a talent there, but they hone that skill, and it kind of separates them from the others. No different from what you're talking about.
Yeah, same thing.
Yeah.
If you ever listen to some of Kobe Bryant's interviews or
Oh,
discussions,
right.
that
Four
guy
o'clock in
was
the morning. No,
relentless.
and there was no BS.
Yeah,
They talk about him. People say, was he really kidding? Everybody's witnessed it, saying absolutely not. He was a killer. He put the time
yeah,
in.
yeah. And I mean, we love sleep. There's only everybody has 24
Yeah.
hours in the day. It's kind of how you use them. If you want to use most of them sleeping, okay, that's great. But if you want to advance, then you're going to have to be up. If you want to compete for a residency, you have to ask yourself, what are you going to do that's going to be better than the people you're competing against to get the edge up? And sometimes it stinks, but you know,
Yeah. But
yeah.
look where you are and what it paid off and what you're doing. You're enjoying it. Um, you build a rep. Not only being intentional about, you've talked about your practice and how intentional you were. Now you've built a reputation not just as a surgeon, but a trusted authority in orthopedics. How intentional were you about building your professional brand?
Yeah, I'm by no means a social media
Mm,
guru, but I kind of looked at it as like with Facebook and Instagram. I'm going to create two things. One is we'll have the hospital. The second one is I'll have one professional as well, where I can just post cases, and that's kind of grown over time, which I never thought much of it. But the reach is then I have somebody from Peru reach out, and they're like, "Hey, I've got this course of veterinarians that we want to teach this. Would you be willing to come to Peru?" And it's like, absolutely. And so a lot of the travels and people asking me to do things outside of the United States have come from people seeing posts I've made or things I'm doing that have been posted on social media. So I think building a brand is important, but I also have a soapbox on that, in that there's a lot of people that have built social media brands that are not necessarily
mm-hmm.
experts. They're experts at getting followers.
Right.
Um, but again, I'm old school. I look at an expert as somebody not who has a bunch of followers, but what papers have they published? What book chapters have they published? What have they established in their career? Like, what do they have that makes what they're saying, relevant? Not I was able to gather 100,000 followers and now therefore I'm now an influencer. So I don't try. And the other thing I don't try to do is sell other people's products. I'm not going to be on social media and then say, you can get scrubs for 10% off if you use this discount code. I'm more or less like, I'm building a brand to show cases of what I do, not to sell somebody's product.
I didn't even know they had that. Is that true? That's interesting.
It is.
Oh my God.
It is. Stethoscopes, scrubs. Companies will say, hey, if you push our product and we'll give you a code, people can go and get percentage off. And for some people that's great for them, but that's not my thing.
Listen, I guess unless it's Nike, it's like, well, Dave, we'll give you $100 million.
I might.
You and me both. Sign me up. Oh, that's good. Oh my God. You're professional. No. I guess orthopedics continues to evolve like everything else rapidly. I guess what innovations are you most excited about right now, if there are any? Especially with AI and technology. Someone's trying to keep up with everything that's evolving in our world.
Yeah, I right now things like 3D printing, the ability for us in the virtual space to be able to correct deformities and then print 3D specific cutting and reduction guides or 3D specific implants. And then also on the human side, a lot of orthopedic surgeries are done under surgical navigation. And so we're starting to see the emergence of surgical navigation on the veterinary side for things like total hip replacement and other procedures. So I think as technology advances, we tend to stay behind what the humans are doing, but things like 3D printing and surgical navigation over the next 5 to 10 years, I think are going to be rapidly emerging.
I know we got a little bit of time here. I was just curious, we started at the outset. I was just introducing you and all the hats that you wear: surgeon, educator, consultant, mentor, researcher, business owner and leader. And I know listen, I know you're a husband and a father too. I guess how do you personally stay grounded while juggling so many hats?
Oh goodness. Well, I put a big focus on exercising.
Yeah.
Now, what that means is I have to get up at like 4 something in the morning because I try to get it done before anybody's awake.
Right.
But I also, my daughter's at the age, she's very competitive in soccer. So once her soccer schedule is released, I put that in the calendar. So, at this point, when people reach out to ask me to do things,
Yeah.
I say, if there's a soccer tournament or soccer game scheduled, I say no, that weekend's off. I've gotten a little bit better about saying no with things and being a little more picky and choosy. But I also look at it as, when I want to spend time with my wife and daughter, and I want to be able to, be part of the family. So other things sometimes get pushed to when others are sleeping. So in the evenings hang out, and then when everybody's kind of winding down, going to bed, then I'll get some stuff done. And then I creep into bed, and then I'm up before they're up so I can get my workout in. So that way, when we're ready to get off to school and work, we can do that. So it is a juggling act. And it does mean that maybe I don't always get as much sleep as I should, but I'm tolerable as long as I get my workouts in.
Right.
Is typically the way it works.
Yeah, listen, I get irritated too. You're so used to doing that. And it's funny you talk. I have someone I know, kids too. I always cherish the mornings, and in my house, my wife is an evening person, and I'm a morning person. And when my kids were home, they're in college now. The mornings were my time. You're up early. You get go work out. Have a cup of coffee, get some stuff, get focused for the day, and then get to enjoy them. And it is a balance, but that time goes quick with your kids, so you want to obviously spend the time, with them, because before you know it, it's they're going here and there. It's almost like that. I always laugh at Cat in the Cradle song, which I love, by Cat Stevens. And hey, Dad, give me the car keys, and they're taking off. My middle daughter, two of my kids just came home from college yesterday. My middle one, I had a dinner meeting last night, and my middle one, I know she's going out with her boyfriend tonight, so I want the keys and leave. I won't see her. I'll see her maybe tomorrow. It's just that coming full circle, so it's good.
Yeah, my daughter's 15, so she's slowly hitting the point where she's not around as
Yeah,
much, but still at home. But once she's driving, then I think it's going to get tough. So now I try to cherish all those moments, even though she may not want to hang out with
yeah.
me. I'm still trying to force her to force myself on her to hang
I
out.
do a lot of listening. Is what I do. They don't really want my opinion. I just listen at the table, or I listen. So they want my opinion. It's usually they're like, "Oh yeah, Dad," but I sit there and I just listen. But you want to be present. I
Yep.
guess looking back at your younger self, what would you tell your is there anything that you tell your younger self during your residency that you do differently? I mean, it's interesting that you told me. There's two types, I think, of people in your profession. There's those who, at a very young age, I'd say 12 or under, there's some defining moments that this is all I know I want to be a veterinarian. And then there's the others like yourself, and I hear this a lot, college or high school, and they're kind of, and you'd even talk about some passion for animals that you have. It was more the skills, or that you were bringing to the table that kind of drew you to it. I guess looking back at your younger self, is there anything you do differently or tell yourself differently?
Oh gosh. I think and knowing where I'm at now, I probably would have tried to learn a little bit more about business and finance. That's been one of those
Yeah,
things where I've kind of had to learn along the way that if I had known some things ahead of time, maybe it would have made things easier. I mean, I've thought at times about going back and getting my MBA, but then it's kind of like, well, I don't know. Number one, I don't have the time. But
right.
number two, is it really going to change, things for me? Especially when you start talking with people on like balance sheets and P&Ls and creative ways to where to put money and when to buy and all these things, because there's not really a playbook. There's not a you decide to open a business and then they're like, okay, well, here's your business owner's playbook. If you just follow this, you're successful. You kind of have to figure it out yourself, and you kind of need to arm yourself with a team of individuals that can help you along the way with the different aspects of business, and then listen to them, and then kind of find your way, I guess, would be the best thing. And that takes time. That's taken time on my end of getting really outside my comfort zone, because I'm so medically and clinically oriented, to now start listening to podcasts and videos and read books on leadership, on management of people, on business and finance and those sorts of things.
Yeah, you're not, listen, not that it helps you. You're not alone. That is probably next to communication and the lack of the communication skill that a lot of younger veterinarians have. The business and finance, gap is a big thing that you hear, issue that you hear from your colleagues, and most of you who are in veterinary school, you don't have the time to learn about business or finance, even if it's offered there through one of the programs. I've heard a lot of young students say goes in this year, not the other, because you're just trying to graduate. It's just not there. And to your point, how do people fill that gap? Is they're putting their team around them, their accountant, their bookkeeper, their finance, their financial advisor, their lawyer, all things that I know you've done very successfully. And I think for veterinarians like you, if you talk to somebody 20 years your senior, they didn't have at least easy. I don't think as accessible those teams of people there. Where I think you and your colleagues, there's groups that you can reach out to now, and you just make sure they fit your culture. You want to put the team. And I always tell clients when they reach out to me, you should talk to other lawyers. You want to make sure you want to have the right people on your team, and it goes back to that old baseball analogy.
Yeah, oh yeah. I mean, arming, the accountant, the attorney, your bit, financial planner, and all these people that have your best interest out there, that have you explain your vision, and then they can help you achieve it. So you don't have to do it all alone. You do need to assemble your team. But you also have to, I think you really have to sit down and look at the vision and say, what is it that I want to achieve? Like, what is, my driving force by opening a practice, and what am I hoping to get out of it? And how do I, otherwise you're just kind of lost the whole time and it feels like you're overwhelmed, versus I always go back to my original business plan, and it has listed out what I want to achieve and what my vision of the practice was and how I wanted to move forward with things. And then every time I kind of feel myself getting a little lost, I just go back and read that and say, this is, 4 years ago when I started this process, this was my thought, and I'm going to stick with this. And I find that by doing that, it helps me stay grounded. It helps me keep moving forward.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, Dave, as we wrap up, where can our listeners learn more about you and your work?
Yeah, so our website on the clinical side is fusionvetortho.com. And then they can also find me. So I have my own website. It's drdaviddycus.com. On Instagram, it's at Fusion Vet Ortho or at ortho_vet. And then Facebook, it's just Dr. David Dycus. So a couple of avenues, or just pop in my name in Google, and those usually pop up as well.
Yeah, and we're going to drop all those links when we drop this podcast. So it's good seeing you. I appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to spend some time with me today. So thanks, Dave, for joining me.
Absolutely. Yeah, I appreciate it. Have a good one.